The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, as it did every day. Sarah Mitchell stretched out her arm to silence it before the sound woke Emma, her 12-year-old daughter who slept in the room next door. The small two-room apartment in the Pine Hill neighborhood of Boston was still shrouded in the early morning darkness when she got up. Moving with the precision of someone who knows every inch of the space, Sarah prepared strong coffee and sorted out her daughter's medications, carefully organizing them in a colorful pill organizer. "Good morning, Mum," mumbled Emma, appearing at the door with her curly hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Already awake, sweetheart? Go back to sleep for a little while. It's still early and Mrs. Wilson won't arrive until 7, Sarah replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Did you take your evening medication?" Emma confirmed with a nod. "I couldn't sleep well. I'm tired of being tired, Mum." Her daughter's words pierced Sarah's heart like a cold blade. It was for Emma that she woke up every day, faced the crowded buses, and swallowed her pride. It was for her that she had accepted a job as a nanny after 15 years of saving lives as a cardiologist. It was for Emma that she held back tears when former colleagues recognized her on the streets of Beacon Hill, the upscale neighborhood where she now worked. "You'll feel better soon," she said, trying to sound optimistic. "The health insurance has already approved your appointment with the specialist next month." Sarah finished getting ready, wearing simple jeans and a plain blouse, the unofficial uniform she had created for herself. She grabbed her backpack containing a home-prepared lunch and a change of clothes. She hugged Emma once more, went over instructions with Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor who looked after the girl during her absence, and headed out into the still dark street. Descending the hill was the first challenge of the day. Sarah knew every alley, every shortcut, every spot where the uneven pavement demanded extra attention. She walked with firm, quick steps, carrying not just the backpack on her shoulders, but a world of responsibilities and secrets. Upon reaching the bus stop, she blended into the crowd of workers who, like her, crossed the city daily to serve families in the South End. The 40-minute journey was her transition moment. There, looking out the bus window, Sarah left behind the woman she had been, Dr. Mitchell, respected cardiologist at Boston Medical Center, and prepared to be just Sarah, the silent and efficient nanny for the Anderson family. When she disembarked in Beacon Hill, the sun was already illuminating the facades of luxurious buildings. She walked 15 more minutes to reach the Andersons' mansion, located on a quiet, tree-lined street. She took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. "Good morning, Sarah," greeted Jennifer Anderson, opening the door with perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and designer clothes, despite it being only 7 in the morning. "Michael already left for the office, and Lily is still sleeping. She had a restless night." "Good morning, Mom. Any specific symptoms?" asked Sarah, trying to contain the clinical tone that stubbornly emerged in her voice. "Nothing serious, just woke up a few times." "You know how children are," Jennifer responded, unconcerned, as she picked up her Italian designer handbag that cost more than Sarah earned in 6 months. "I have meetings all day. I'll be back for dinner." As soon as Jennifer left, Sarah went upstairs to Lily's room. She paused at the door, observing the 6-year-old girl sleeping wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets. She approached slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, noticing pinkish spots on the child's arms. She touched her forehead with the back of her hand, a gesture that mixed a nanny's affection with a doctor's precision, and detected a slightly elevated temperature. "Good morning, princess," she whispered, when the girl's eyes opened. "Sarah," exclaimed Lily, using the nickname she had invented. "You were late today." "I arrived at the same time as always, little one. How are you feeling?" "Tired, and my tummy hurts a little." Sarah smiled, hiding her concern. "Let's get up, have a nice breakfast, and then decide what to do today. How about that?" In the spacious, modern kitchen, Sarah prepared a balanced meal for Lily, carefully observing each of the girls' reactions. She knew the signs. The child was eating less than usual, complained of frequent abdominal pain, and had unexplained skin rashes that appeared and disappeared. She had tried to mention her concerns to the parents, but Jennifer considered it an exaggeration, and Michael was rarely present to listen. "Sarah, why don't you wear a white coat like the doctors at the hospital?" Lily suddenly asked, while playing with fruit pieces on her plate. The question caught Sarah by surprise. "Why are you asking that, Lily?" "Because you always know when I'm sick, and you use difficult words like Dr. Robert." Sarah swallowed hard. Dr. Robert was Lily's pediatrician, who saw her sporadically when symptoms became impossible to ignore. "I just pay close attention to you, sweetheart. It's different. One day, I want to be smart like you," declared the girl with childlike simplicity. Those simple words brought to the surface memories that Sarah struggled to keep dormant. She remembered her years at Boston University, the sleepless nights studying, the exhausting hospital shifts, the lives she had saved, and then the nightmare that followed when she decided to report the medical fraud scheme she had discovered. The distrust in colleagues' eyes, the isolation, doors closing one by one, until nothing remained but silence and forgetfulness. The day proceeded like so many others. Sarah helped Lily with her homework, played with her in the garden, prepared lunch, and discreetly checked the child's vital signs during her afternoon nap. Around 6, the front door opened, announcing Michael Anderson's early arrival. Tall, with an imposing presence and always dressed in expensive suits, Michael was the typical successful businessman. He rarely arrived before 8, and his presence at that hour in the house caused surprise. "Daddy!" shouted Lily, running to hug him. "Hi, Princess," he replied, lifting his daughter in the air with a tired smile. His eyes met Sarah's for a moment. "Any problems today?" "No, sir, just homework and playing in the garden," she replied, omitting her concerns about the girl's health. She knew from experience that Michael would minimize the situation, attributing everything to child's fussiness, as he usually said. "Good. Did Jennifer call? She should be home later." "I didn't receive any message, sir." Michael nodded, putting Lily down. "You can go then. Tomorrow is Friday. Don't forget that Jennifer will travel to New York with her mother. You'll need to stay later." "Yes, sir, I'll be here." As she packed her things to leave, Sarah heard Michael on the phone talking about numbers, contracts, and deadlines. His voice was firm, different from the hesitant tone he used with his daughter. Two distinct worlds, she thought, just like hers, Dr. Mitchell's, which lay dormant, and Nanny Sarah's, which now lived. She said goodbye to Lily with a tight hug, promising to return the next day. The girl, as always, asked for one more story before bed, a request Sarah couldn't refuse, even knowing the bus was already heading to the stop. Upon leaving the mansion, Sarah breathed in the night air that was beginning to fall over Boston. In the heights of Beacon Hill, the city lights created a carpet of artificial stars. On the horizon, the blue hills drew dark outlines against the sky. Somewhere among those lights was her home, her daughter, and the reality she hid from everyone. Walking to the bus stop, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. How much longer could she live this double life? How much longer could she ignore the worrying signs in Lily's health, knowing she had the knowledge to help, but not the authority to intervene? Life had taught her in the hardest way that some battles cannot be won, but her instinct as a doctor and as a mother screamed ever louder. The bus appeared on the corner, bringing her back to the present. She boarded, sat by the window, and let her gaze get lost in the city passing outside, carrying with her the weight of the two women who inhabited her body, the silenced doctor and the invisible nanny. Friday dawned with Boston's sky covered by heavy clouds, a harbinger of the rain to come. Sarah woke to the sound of Emma coughing in the next room. She quickly got up and went to her daughter, who was sitting in bed, breathing a bit heavily. "It's okay, Mum. I just choked on my saliva," explained the girl, trying to reassure her. Sarah sat beside her daughter, fixing the rebellious hair that framed Emma's pale face. She took the stethoscope kept in the dresser drawer, the only instrument she had kept from her old life, and listened to her daughter's heartbeat. The rhythm was regular but faster than she would have liked. "I'll leave your morning medicine ready. Mrs. Wilson will make sure you take it at the right time," she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Rest today. No walking around the neighborhood with your friends." "Mom, I'm not a little kid anymore," protested Emma, rolling her eyes in that way only teenagers can. "You'll always be to me. And a doctor is worse than a mother. Imagine both together." Emma smiled, a weak smile that didn't hide the chronic fatigue that accompanied her. Sarah swallowed the lump forming in her throat. The health insurance she had secured as an employee of the Andersons was the only way to ensure the treatment her daughter needed. She couldn't afford to lose that job, no matter how much she sometimes felt she was betraying herself and her vocation. The journey to Beacon Hill that morning seemed longer. The crowded bus moved slowly through congested streets as rain began to fall. Sarah looked through the foggy window, observing the city contours distorting through the raindrops. A city of contrasts, where just a few miles separated completely different realities. Upon arriving at the Andersons' mansion, she found unusual activity. Jennifer, elegantly dressed, was giving hurried instructions to Michael, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Sarah, thank God you're here," Jennifer said as soon as she saw her enter. "I need to leave in 10 minutes to catch the flight to New York. My mother is already at the hospital waiting for the procedure." "Any problem, Mom?" asked Sarah, trying to maintain a neutral tone despite her curiosity about the health status of Michael's mother-in-law. "Nothing serious, just a routine procedure that requires monitoring. The problem is that Michael will be responsible for Lily the entire weekend. It's the first time since—" Jennifer hesitated, looking at her husband with an indecipherable expression. "Well, since ever." Michael looked like a fish out of water, holding a planner in one hand and his cell phone in the other, while trying to pay attention to his wife's instructions about medication schedules and his daughter's food preferences. "Will Sarah stay until later today?" he asked, interrupting Lorena's monologue. "Yes, I arranged for her to leave at 9 after Lily is asleep," Jennifer replied, looking at Sarah for confirmation. "No problem, Mum." Jennifer finished packing her suitcase, kissed her still sleeping daughter and left in a hurry, leaving behind a visibly anxious Michael and a Sarah who observed everything with clinical attention. "I have meetings all day via computer," said Michael, breaking the awkward silence that settled after his wife's departure. "Can you stay with Lily? I'll be in the office, but call me if you need anything." "Of course, sir. That's my job," replied Sarah, holding back a sigh of frustration. Michael spoke as if he were asking for an extraordinary favor, when in fact he was just describing the function for which he paid her. The day went smoothly until mid-afternoon. Lily was quieter than usual, refusing her snack and complaining of leg pain. Sarah checked her temperature, slightly elevated, and decided it was time to alert Michael. She knocked on the office door and waited. The deep voice authorized her entry, and she found her employer immersed in papers and with his gaze fixed on the computer screen. "Sir, excuse me for interrupting, but Lily isn't feeling well. I think it would be good to give her some fever medication." Michael frowned as if processing information in a foreign language. "She has a fever. It must be a virus, right? Kids always catch these things." "The temperature is 100 degrees to 4. It's not alarming, but considering the other symptoms she's been showing in recent weeks, I think it's prudent to monitor," explained Sarah, struggling not to sound like the doctor she once was. "Other symptoms? What other symptoms?" questioned Michael, finally taking his eyes off the screen and facing Sarah. "The skin rashes, constant fatigue, leg pains. I've already mentioned them to Mrs. Anderson, but she thought it wasn't serious." Michael seemed genuinely surprised. "Jennifer didn't tell me anything about this." A heavy silence settled between them. Sarah realized she had touched on a sensitive point, the fragmented communication of the couple, especially when it came to their daughter. "I'll give her the fever medication and continue observing. If the temperature rises, you will be informed immediately," said Sarah, backing toward the door. "Wait," Michael called before she left. Do you think we should take her to the doctor?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. It was the first time Michael had asked for her opinion on something related to his daughter's health. "I believe it would be prudent to schedule an appointment for next week, yes. Better safe than sorry." Michael nodded, thoughtful. "Take care of her. I'll try to finish this as quickly as possible to help." Sarah returned to Lily, who was now lying on the living room couch, watching cartoons with a sleepy look. She gave her the fever medication and sat down beside her, stroking her hair with the delicacy of someone touching something precious. "Sarah, tell me a story?" asked the girl with a weak voice. "What kind of story would you like to hear today?" "A superheroine story, but not those fantasy ones. A real one." Sarah smiled, thinking about what to tell. She decided to adapt a real story, something from her past that could inspire Lily without revealing too much. Once upon a time, there was a woman named Helen who worked in a big hospital. She didn't have superpowers like flying or becoming invisible, but she had something very special. She could hear people's hearts and understand when something wasn't right. "Like with a stethoscope?" asked Lily, interested. "Yes, she used one. But the real power was in paying attention to the small details that no one else noticed. One day Helen realized that an elderly gentleman who had gone to the hospital several times was being treated incorrectly. Why? Because sometimes even doctors make mistakes, Lily, and some don't like to admit when they're wrong. That's stupid, declared the girl with the brutal honesty typical of children. Sarah laughed. Yes, it is. Helen tried to talk to the other doctors, show them what she had discovered, but no one wanted to listen. So she decided to do the right thing, even knowing she could have problems. And what happened? Asked Lily, completely engrossed in the story. Sarah hesitated. How to explain professional persecution, defamation, and isolation to a 6-year-old child? Some people got angry with her. Helen had to leave the hospital, but she never regretted helping that gentleman. Because sometimes, Lily, being a hero means doing the right thing even when it's difficult. And where is she now? Asked Lily, with eyes already heavy with sleep. She found another way to help people. Different, but still important. Lily yawned, nestling closer to Sarah. I like that story. I want to be like Helen when I grow up. You'll be much more, little one, whispered Sarah as the girl fell asleep in her arms. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. The rain intensified outside, creating a curtain of water that isolated the mansion from the rest of the world. Michael came out of the office a few times to check on his daughter, surprising Sarah with his genuine, if awkward, interest. Around 7 in the evening, Michael appeared in the living room where Sarah was organizing Lily's toys. Sarah, I need to go to the office to get some documents. It will be quick, half an hour at most. Is Lily sleeping? Yes, sir. The fever has subsided and she's resting. Great, I'll be back soon. Call me if anything happens, he said, handing her a card with his personal number. As soon as Michael left, Sarah went upstairs to check on Lily. The girl was sleeping peacefully, her breathing regular, her skin less warm to the touch. Sarah adjusted the covers and decided to use the moment to prepare dinner. In the spacious, modern kitchen, Sarah moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to optimizing time. As she chopped vegetables for a light soup, her thoughts wandered between Emma, alone at home, and Lily sleeping upstairs. Two such different children, but equally important in her life. The sound of something falling upstairs interrupted her thoughts. She dropped the knife and ran up the stairs, her heart racing with apprehension. Upon entering Lily's room, she found her on the floor, beside the bed, with half-closed eyes and irregular breathing. "Lily, Lily," she called, kneeling beside the child. There was no response. The girl's lips were pale, her skin cold and clammy. With the precision of years of medical training, Sarah checked her vital signs. Weak and rapid pulse, shallow breathing. She recognized the signs of severe hypoglycemia, probably aggravated by the fever, and reduced food intake during the day. Without thinking twice, Sarah took her phone and called Michael. "Sir, it's an emergency. Lily fainted and needs immediate medical attention. I'm calling an ambulance." Michael's voice on the other end of the line sounded distant, panicked. "My God, I'm coming back right now." Sarah hung up and immediately dialed the emergency service, providing the address and symptoms with the clarity of a healthcare professional. While waiting, she correctly positioned Lily, elevating her legs to improve blood flow, and constantly checked her vital signs. The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. The rain battered the windows, creating an anguishing symphony that accompanied Lily's irregular breathing. Sarah talked to her, trying to keep her conscious, using techniques she knew well from her hospital days. When she finally heard the front door being violently opened, Sarah knew Michael had arrived. The heavy footsteps on the stairs announced his presence before he even appeared at the door, soaked and breathless. "What happened?" "My daughter," he stammered, approaching with his face contorted by fear. "Severe hypoglycemia. The ambulance is on its way. I managed to stabilize her for now, but she needs hospital care," explained Sarah, without taking her eyes off Lily. Michael seemed paralyzed, unable to process what was happening. I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice choked. "Now we can only wait for the ambulance and stay calm," Sarah replied, with a firmness that came from years of dealing with emergencies. "Talk to her, hold her hand. She needs to feel she's not alone." Obeying like a lost child, Michael knelt on the other side of his daughter and held her small hand between his. "Daddy's here, princess. Everything will be okay," he whispered, with tears in his eyes. At that moment, as the rain continued to fall over Boston, something changed between Sarah and Michael. The invisible barriers of class and hierarchy that separated them seemed to have been temporarily suspended by the urgency of the situation. They were no longer employer and employee, but two people united by concern for a child they loved, each in their own way. The sound of the siren cut through the night, announcing the arrival of the ambulance. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing for what would come next. She knew that night would change many things, for Lily, for Michael, and, inevitably, for herself. The hospital waiting room pulsed with that peculiar anxiety of places where life and suffering coexist side by side. Michael paced back and forth, running his hands through his disheveled hair, while Sarah remained seated, her back straight and her gaze fixed on the door where doctors would appear at any moment. The rain continued outside, a silent witness to that night that would change everything. "How did you know what to do?" Michael suddenly asked, stopping in front of Sarah. It was the first time he had spoken since they had arrived at the hospital almost 2 hours ago. "With Lily. You seemed to know exactly what was happening." Sarah hesitated. This was neither the time nor the place to reveal her past. "I took a first aid course a few years ago," she replied, averting her gaze. "No, it was more than that," insisted Michael, sitting down beside her. "The paramedics commented on the correct positioning, on the precise assessment of symptoms. They said you saved her life." "Anyone would have done the same, sir." "No, they wouldn't have," he retorted with unusual frankness. "I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed seeing my daughter unconscious. If it weren't for you—" The words hung in the air, laden with a meaning neither of them was ready to fully explore. They were saved by the emergence of a middle-aged doctor who approached with a serious expression. "Family of Lily Anderson." Michael jumped to his feet. "I'm her father. How is she, doctor?" "Stable now," replied the doctor. "Your daughter had an episode of acute hypoglycemia, aggravated by an infectious condition. Fortunately, the pre-hospital care was excellent, which prevented major complications." "And what caused this?" asked Michael, his voice trembling. The doctor hesitated, looking from Michael to Sarah with a questioning expression. "You are—" "Sarah Mitchell, Lily's nanny," she replied, also standing up. "Ah, it was you who provided first aid, correct? The paramedics mentioned a rather professional intervention." Sarah nodded, feeling Michael's curious gaze on her. "Well, Mr. Anderson, we conducted some preliminary tests, and there are indications that your daughter may have a condition that affects glucose metabolism. We'll need to do more specific tests to confirm the diagnosis, but we suspect a form of diabetes atypical for her age, possibly associated with some autoimmune condition." Michael turned pale, leaning against the nearby wall. "Is it serious?" "It's a condition that will require continuous monitoring, but that can be perfectly controlled with appropriate treatment. The important thing now is to fully understand her condition." "When can I see her?" asked Michael. "Soon. She's resting. She received intravenous glucose and is responding well. One of the nurses will come to get you as soon as possible." When the doctor walked away, Michael and Sarah sat back down, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The silence between them was dense, loaded with unformulated questions and untold truths. "You already suspected something like this, didn't you?" Michael finally asked, looking directly at Sarah. She took a deep breath before answering. "I noticed some signs over the past few weeks. The skin rashes, constant fatigue, the leg pains she mentioned. These are symptoms that may indicate metabolic alterations. And why didn't you say anything?" "I did, sir. I mentioned it to Mrs. Anderson more than once, suggested a consultation with the pediatrician, but—" Sarah left the sentence unfinished, not wanting to sound accusatory. "But we weren't listened to," completed Michael, running his hands over his tired face. "Neither you nor Lily. We were too busy to notice our daughter was sick." The guilt in his voice was palpable, and Sarah felt a pang of compassion. "Children can be very resilient, sir, and some symptoms are subtle at first. Don't blame yourself." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Not blame myself? I've spent the last few years prioritizing my company over my family. I barely know my own daughter. And today, when she needed me most, I froze like an idiot." "Fear is natural when it comes to our children," said Sarah, thinking of Emma and the countless nights she had stayed awake, fearing the worst. "What matters is what we do after the fear." Michael looked at her with renewed curiosity. "Do you have children, Sarah?" A 12-year-old girl, Emma. I didn't know that, he admitted, seeming genuinely surprised. We never talked about, well, about you. It's not part of the job, sir, she replied with a slight smile. A nurse appeared at the door of the waiting room. Mr. Anderson, you can see your daughter now. Michael quickly stood up, but before following the nurse, he turned to Sarah. Come with me, he asked with a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. Lily will want to see you too. Surprised by the request, Sarah followed Michael through the familiar hospital corridors. How many times had she walked these same paths, wearing a white coat and carrying a stethoscope around her neck? The characteristic smell of disinfectant, the muffled sound of conversations and equipment, everything brought back memories she had tried to bury. Lily was lying in a bed that seemed too big for her small body. IV tubes and monitors surrounded her, but her eyes were open and brightened when she saw her father and Sarah entering the room. "Sarah!" exclaimed the girl, with a weak but excited voice. "Daddy said you saved me." Sarah approached the bed, affectionately adjusting the child's hair. "Are you feeling better, little one?" "I am, but I don't like these needles," replied Lily, making a face at the IV in her arm. "They're helping you get strong again," explained Sarah. "They'll be gone soon." Michael observed the interaction between the two with a different look, as if seeing something that had always been there, but that he had never really noticed. "The nurse said I'll have to take shots," commented Lily, pouting. "I don't want to. They're to help you get well, princess," intervened Michael, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding his daughter's hand. "And I bet you're brave enough to handle it. You'll learn to be strong like a lioness," added Sarah, "and you'll see it's not as bad as it seems." A nurse entered the room, bringing a clipboard. "Excuse the interruption, but we need some additional information about the patient's medical history." Michael looked confused. "Wouldn't it be better to talk to my wife? She's the one who always takes Lily to the doctor." "You can give us a contact number, and we'll try to speak with her," replied the nurse. "But we need this information as soon as possible to adjust the treatment." "I don't know much," admitted Michael, visibly embarrassed. "Sarah, would you know how to answer?" Sarah nodded, surprised by the request. "I can try." She accompanied the nurse outside the room, where she answered questions about allergies, vaccinations, and previous episodes of similar symptoms. She spoke with the confidence of someone who knew not only the patient, but also the medical language, which did not go unnoticed by the professional. "Do you have any training in healthcare?" asked the nurse, curious. "I've worked in a hospital before," replied Sarah vaguely. When she returned to the room, she found Michael sitting close to the bed, telling a story to Lily, who was already fighting sleep. The scene touched Sarah deeply. It was the first time she had seen the businessman really connected with his daughter, without the usual rush or distant look. "She's almost asleep," whispered Michael when Sarah approached. "The doctors said she needs to rest." "That's best for her now." "You must want to go home," he said, checking his watch. "It's past midnight. I apologize for keeping you here so late." "Don't worry about that," replied Sarah. "I called my neighbor and she's with Emma. Even so, you must be exhausted. I can call a taxi to take you." "I appreciate it, sir, but I prefer the bus. Some still run at this hour." Michael frowned, seeming bothered. "It's not safe for a woman alone on public transportation at this hour. I'll order a rideshare for you." Before Sarah could protest, he was already on his phone requesting the service. "It's the least I can do after everything you did for Lily today." "I just did my job, Mr. Anderson." "No, Sarah," he said seriously. "You did much more than that. And I think it's time we talked about who you really are." Sarah's heart raced. "I don't understand what you mean." "Yes, you do," he countered, with a penetrating look. "No ordinary nanny would know how to do what you did today." The paramedics commented that the procedure was perfect, as if it had been performed by an experienced doctor. Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her carefully guarded secret was about to be revealed. "This isn't the time for that conversation," she said, trying to buy time. "Lily needs you here, and I need to go home to see my daughter." Michael nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but this conversation will happen, Sarah. Tomorrow. I want to understand why someone with your skills is working as a nanny in my house." "Not all stories have simple explanations, sir," she replied, heading for the door. "Jennifer is trying to get back from New York," informed Michael, changing the subject. "But with the rain, flights are delayed. She'll arrive only in the morning." Lily will be fine. The team at this hospital is excellent. How do you know? He asked with genuine curiosity. Sarah hesitated before answering. I've been here before. Before Michael could ask more questions, his cell phone vibrated. Your car has arrived, he informed, after checking the message. Go rest. And thank you, Sarah. Really. She nodded and left the room, feeling Michael's gaze following her until she disappeared down the corridor. As she walked to the hospital exit, Sarah passed places that were once part of her routine. The third-floor nursing station, where she used to drink coffee during night shifts. The doctor's room, where she discussed complex cases with colleagues who now probably didn't even remember her name. The chapel where she had cried after losing her first patient. The hospital wasn't just a place. It was an entire chapter of her life that had been abruptly ended. And now, as in a poorly written novel, fate had brought her back through the hands of a child. In the car, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. Silent tears ran down her face as the nighttime city passed by the window. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from the complexity of feelings that flooded her. Relief that Lily was okay, fear of having her past exposed, the timid hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her life could take a new direction. When the car stopped in front of the housing complex where she lived, the rain had already decreased to a light drizzle. She thanked the driver and walked to her building, feeling the weight of the day in each step. Upon opening the apartment door, she found Mrs. Wilson asleep on the couch and Emma in her bed, breathing peacefully. Sarah sat beside her daughter, observing her serene face as she slept. She lightly touched her hair, careful not to wake her. "For you, my love," she whispered. "Everything for you." She lay down next to Emma without bothering to change clothes or shower. The fatigue was so great that in minutes she was asleep. But her sleep was restless, populated by dreams where white coat and nanny uniform mixed, where hospital corridors transformed into the Andersons' mansion stairs, where voices from the past urgently called her name. At the hospital, Michael remained beside Lily's bed, observing his daughter's sleep while his mind worked, trying to connect the pieces of the puzzle that was Sarah Mitchell, the silent and efficient nanny who, for one night, had transformed into something completely different, someone with knowledge, confidence, and a natural authority that had impressed even the experienced doctors in the emergency room. With his cell phone, he discreetly searched for Sarah's name. Nothing relevant appeared immediately. He hesitated and then added doctor to the search. The results surprised him. Academic articles from years ago, mentions in medical publications, a faded graduation photo from Boston University. The woman in the photo smiled with confidence, her eyes bright with someone who had the future ahead. She was younger, but unmistakably Sarah, the same one who now cleaned the house and cared for his daughter for minimum wage. "Who are you really, Sarah Mitchell?" Michael murmured to himself, as the first rays of sunlight began to enter through the cracks in the hospital blinds, announcing a new day and possibly a new beginning for all of them. Saturday dawned with a surprisingly clear sky, as if the previous night's storm had washed away not only Boston's streets, but also the accumulated tensions. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily confused to realize she was still wearing the previous day's clothes. Beside her, Emma slept peacefully, her rhythmic breathing a constant reminder of why she did everything she did. She carefully got up so as not to wake her daughter and found Mrs. Wilson in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Girl, you gave me such a scare yesterday," exclaimed the neighbor, a robust lady with grey hair and a welcoming smile. "Arriving after midnight, all wet from the rain, did something happen at the rich folks' house?" Sarah accepted the cup of coffee offered to her, grateful for the gesture. "My employer's daughter had a medical emergency. I had to accompany them to the hospital." "And what about your job now? Will they need you on the weekend?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. With everything that had happened, she hadn't thought about the next steps. "I don't know, Mrs. Wilson. Probably yes, at least to check how the girl is doing." "And Emma, will she be alone again?" Sarah felt the weight of guilt, a familiar burden she had carried for years. "I'll talk to her. Maybe I can take her with me, depending on the situation." Mrs. Wilson shook her head, in a gesture that mixed understanding and disapproval. "You bend over backwards for this family that isn't even yours while your own daughter—" "It's precisely for Emma that I do this," interrupted Sarah firmly. "The health insurance I got as their employee is what guarantees her treatment. The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of her cell phone. Sarah answered, recognizing Michael Anderson's number. "Good morning, sir," she said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the forced intimacy the emergency situation had created between them. "Sarah," Michael's voice sounded tired, but calmer than the night before. "Lily is well. She'll be discharged in the next few hours. Jennifer arrived from New York and is with us now." "I'm glad to hear that, sir." There was a pause before Michael continued. "We need to talk, not over the phone. Could you come to the hospital, or perhaps we could meet somewhere else if you prefer?" Sarah felt her stomach sink. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but still wasn't prepared. "I can go to the hospital, sir, but I'll need to bring my daughter with me if that's not a problem." "Of course no problem," he replied, sounding genuinely understanding. "Actually, it would be good for Lily to have company her age." "Emma is 12, sir. She's a bit older than Lily." "Still, I'm sure they'll get along. We'll be waiting for you." After hanging up, Sarah spent a few moments contemplating her phone, as if it could offer some guidance on what was to come. Mrs. Wilson observed her with curiosity. "Problem?" asked the neighbor. "I don't know yet," replied Sarah honestly, "but I think my life is about to change." Waking Emma and explaining the situation was easier than Sarah expected. The girl, despite the chronic fatigue that accompanied her, was excited about the prospect of seeing her mother's workplace and the family she heard so much about. "Is Lily nice?" asked Emma while getting ready. "Very. I'm sure you'll get along," replied Sarah, helping her daughter choose an outfit. "But remember, she's recovering from a health problem, so we have to be gentle." "Like me when I get sick?" asked Emma, with the precocious wisdom of someone who has lived with limitations from an early age. "Something like that, yes." During the journey to the hospital, Sarah tried to organize her thoughts. What would she say to Michael? How much of her story was she willing to share? And how would this affect her job, on which she depended not only for her livelihood, but mainly for Emma's treatment? They arrived at the hospital shortly after 10 in the morning. Sarah held Emma's hand firmly as they crossed the familiar lobby. It was strange to enter there as a visitor, after so many years entering as a doctor, with the white coat that was once her uniform and her identity. In Lily's room, they found the family gathered. Michael looked exhausted, with deep dark circles and unshaven, but there was a softness in his gaze that Sarah didn't know. Jennifer, impeccably dressed even after an emergency trip, was sitting beside her daughter's bed, running her fingers through the girl's hair while talking to a doctor Sarah immediately recognized, Dr. Richard Myers, her former residency colleague. "Sarah!" exclaimed Lily upon seeing her, lighting up with a smile. "You came to visit me." "Of course, little one," replied Sarah, approaching the bed, "and I brought someone for you to meet. This is my daughter, Emma." The two girls looked at each other with the natural curiosity of childhood, immediately starting a conversation about games and cartoons. Jennifer stood up and greeted Sarah with a surprisingly warm hug. "Michael told me everything," she said, her voice choked. "If it weren't for you, I just did what anyone would do," replied Sarah, embarrassed by the attention. "No, you didn't," intervened Michael, approaching. "And I think everyone here knows that now." Dr. Richard's gaze fixed on Sarah, his eyes widening in belated recognition. "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell?" An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Sarah felt that all the pieces were falling into place in a way she could no longer control. "You know each other?" asked Jennifer, confused. Dr. Richard hesitated, looking from Sarah to the Andersons. "We worked together a few years ago at Boston Medical Center." "Worked together?" repeated Michael, staring at Sarah intensely. "As doctors, I imagine." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of silence finally dissipating. "Yes, as doctors. I was a cardiologist for 15 years. The confession hung in the air like something physical, reorganizing the dynamics of the room. Jennifer seemed completely perplexed. Michael had an expression of confirmation, as if he had finally solved a puzzle, and Dr. Richard seemed divided between surprise and embarrassment. "I think we should continue this conversation elsewhere," suggested Michael, looking at the girls who, oblivious to the adults' tension, had started a card game Emma had taken from her backpack. "I agree," replied Sarah, feeling strangely relieved to no longer have to hide who she was. They went out into the corridor, leaving the girls under a nurse's supervision. Dr. Richard excused himself and walked away, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Michael, Jennifer, and Sarah found a small empty waiting room and sat down. "Why didn't you tell us?" asked Jennifer, still processing the information. "All this time, a doctor working as a nanny in our house." "It wasn't relevant to the job," replied Sarah simply. "Not relevant?" questioned Michael, leaning forward. "Sarah, you literally saved our daughter's life using medical knowledge that you deliberately hid from us." "What happened?" asked Jennifer. "Why did you leave medicine? And how did you end up, working for us?" Sarah looked out the window of the small room, observing the movement of the hospital outside. How many stories had those walls witnessed? Hers was just one more. "5 years ago, I discovered a fraud scheme at the hospital where I worked," she began, carefully choosing her words. "Some doctors were issuing false certificates and diverting medications. I reported it to the proper authorities, as was my ethical duty." "And what happened?" asked Jennifer, genuinely interested. "What always happens to those who break the code of silence," replied Sarah with a sad smile. "I was isolated. Colleagues who once respected me began to avoid me. Shifts were cancelled, patients redistributed. Nothing official, nothing that could be proven as retaliation. Just a gradual and systematic removal." "And the reports?" questioned Michael. "They were archived due to lack of concrete evidence. The whistleblower's word against that of respected doctors in the community. Guess who lost?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with simultaneous indignation and understanding. "Eventually, I resigned. I couldn't stand the hostile environment anymore. I thought I would find employment at another hospital, but I discovered that my reputation had been tarnished. No one wanted to hire the problematic doctor." "And your daughter?" asked Jennifer, surprising Sarah with the personal question. "Emma was born with a heart condition. It's not serious, but requires constant monitoring and medication. Without a steady job, I lost the health insurance that covered her treatment. That's when I decided to accept any job that offered medical benefits. And so you came to us," concluded Michael, with a new understanding in his eyes. "Your employment agency didn't mention anything about your professional background," commented Jennifer, frowning. "Because I didn't tell them," admitted Sarah. "I learned the hard way that being overqualified closes more doors than it opens. No one wants to hire a former doctor to be a nanny or cleaner. They think it's temporary, that the person will leave the job at the first opportunity." "And would you leave?" asked Michael, with surprising frankness. "No," replied Sarah without hesitation. "Emma needs the treatment that health insurance provides, and besides," she hesitated, "I've grown fond of Lily. She reminds me of my daughter when she was younger." Jennifer wiped away a tear that ran down her perfectly made-up face. "I don't know what to say, Sarah. Part of me is shocked to have been deceived all this time, but another part can only feel gratitude for what you did for Lily." "It wasn't my intention to deceive you," explained Sarah. "I just needed the job and knew my professional background would be an impediment." Michael stood up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, a thoughtful countenance. When he turned, there was a determination in his gaze that Sarah recognized. It was the same look she saw in the mirror years ago, when she still believed that doing the right thing always paid off. "I want to make you a proposal, Sarah," he said, with a firm voice. "Not as your employer, but as the father of a child you saved." "What kind of proposal?" she asked cautiously. "Lily's diagnosis, type 1 diabetes with autoimmune complications, will require constant care, monitoring, medication adjustments. She will need someone who understands not just basic care, but who has the medical knowledge to identify warning signs." "Are you thinking of hiring a nurse?" asked Sarah, feeling a tightness in her chest at the thought of being replaced. "We're thinking of redefining your role," interrupted Jennifer, exchanging a knowing look with her husband. "From nanny to family health consultant, with a salary compatible with your training and experience." Sarah blinked several times, unable to fully process what she was hearing. "I don't understand." "It's simple," continued Michael. "You continue caring for Lily, but now officially using your medical knowledge. Additionally, we want you to develop a wellness program for our company's employees." "But my registration with the medical board can be reactivated," completed Michael. "I have contacts who can help with the bureaucracy, and if there's any problem related to the past reports, I have lawyers willing to investigate." The offer was tempting, almost too perfect to be true. Sarah felt a mixture of hope and distrust. feelings that had become familiar in recent years. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked with the frankness the situation required. "Because you saved our daughter," replied Jennifer simply. "And because it's the right thing to do," added Michael. "You lost your career for doing what was right. In a way that makes me question how many times I've been complacent in similar situations." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, informing them that Lily was ready to be discharged. The three returned to the room, where they found the girls laughing as if they were longtime friends. "Mom, Emma is so cool," exclaimed Lily upon seeing Jennifer. "She taught me a new game and told me that you're like a superhero who saved her life," she continued, looking at Sarah. Emma blushed, embarrassed. "I just told her that my mom helped when she got sick." "Like a real doctor," completed Lily, excited. The adults exchanged significant looks as the pieces of the puzzle continued to fit together in unexpected ways. During the discharge process, Sarah observed the dynamics of the Anderson family with new eyes. Michael, who had always seemed distant and absorbed in his own concerns, now paid attention to every detail of the medical instructions, asking pertinent questions and showing genuine concern. Jennifer, in turn, seemed less focused on perfect appearances and more on her daughter, hugging her frequently and listening attentively to her stories about the night in the hospital. In the parking lot, while waiting for the car Michael had called, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned and found Dr. Richard, with a serious and somewhat melancholic expression. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, casting a hesitant look at the Andersons, who were talking a few meters away. "Of course," replied Sarah, moving a little away with her former colleague. "I didn't know you were working as a nanny," he began, visibly uncomfortable. "After you left the hospital, we lost touch and—" "You don't need to explain, Richard," interrupted Sarah with an understanding smile. "Everyone did what they thought was best at the time." "You were right, you know," he said, lowering his voice. "About the reports. Everything came to light a few months after you left. Some doctors were removed. There was an internal investigation." Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and bitterness. "A bit late for my career, wasn't it?" "Yes, and I apologize for not supporting you when I should have," replied Richard with sincerity. "But maybe it's not too late now. The new director of Boston Medical Center is assembling a team for the pediatric cardiology department. If you're interested, I can mention your name." The offer caught Sarah by surprise. After years of closed doors, now two were opening simultaneously. "Thank you, Richard. I'll think about it." When she returned to the Andersons, she found Michael observing her with curiosity. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," replied Sarah, with a genuine smile. "Actually, better than it has been for a long time." The car arrived and everyone got in. A doctor, a nanny, a businesswoman, an executive, and two children who, despite social and age differences, had found an instant connection. An unlikely combination, brought together by fate, chance, or perhaps something greater that Sarah still couldn't name. As the vehicle moved away from the hospital, Sarah looked out the window at the building that had once been her second home. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years she felt that the possibilities were broader than the limitations, and that, in itself, was already a victory. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us from which city you're watching us. We continue. The weeks that followed brought changes so rapid that Sarah sometimes had to make a conscious effort to assimilate everything. Michael's proposal wasn't just words. In a matter of days, contracts were drafted, lawyers consulted, and a new position was created especially for her. Health and Wellness Coordinator of the Anderson Group. The office she now occupied in the company's corporate building in downtown Boston bore no resemblance to the small apartment in Pine Hill or the aseptic hospital corridors. Spacious, with a view of the Blue Hills, it was decorated with plants and paintings that conveyed tranquility, a deliberate contrast to the cold and impersonal rooms in the rest of the building. "I still can't believe all this is yours," commented Paula, the secretary Michael had assigned to help her. "Not even the directors have a view like this." Sarah smiled, adjusting the frame of a photo on the desk. Emma and Lily hugging, smiling at the camera during a picnic at Boston Common the previous Sunday. "I'm still getting used to the idea. Mr. Anderson seems really committed to this occupational health project," continued Paula, organizing some folders. "I've never seen him so involved in an initiative that wasn't directly related to company profits. "It's what I always tell Mr. Anderson," replied Sarah, organizing her things to leave. "Health isn't an expense, it's an investment. Each employee who can adequately treat a chronic condition represents long-term savings, besides the human gain that is incalculable." The phone rang. It was Michael asking if Sarah could attend an unscheduled meeting in his office. She agreed, trying to ignore the familiar feeling of apprehension that still arose when she was called unexpectedly, a remnant of difficult times at the hospital. On the way to the president's office, Sarah greeted employees who already recognized her in the corridors. In just 3 weeks, she had initiated a basic medical screening program for all collaborators, identifying cases of undiagnosed hypertension, early-stage diabetes, and other problems that, if untreated, could evolve into more serious conditions. The initiative had been received with enthusiasm, especially by operational-level employees who rarely had access to preventive healthcare. Michael's secretary announced her arrival, and the door was opened immediately. To her surprise, Sarah found not only Michael in the room, but also Jennifer and a middle-aged man she didn't know. "Sarah, glad you could come," greeted Michael, rising to receive her. "This is Dr. Mark Thompson, director of St. Mary's Hospital. He has a proposal that I believe will interest you." Dr. Thompson extended his hand with an affable smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Dr. Mitchell. I've heard a lot about your work in recent years." Sarah felt her stomach turn. In recent years, her name was rarely mentioned in medical circles, and when it was, it usually came with suspicious looks and interrupted conversations. "The pleasure is mine, Doctor," she replied cautiously, "although I confess to being surprised by your interest." "Please sit down," invited Michael, indicating a chair. "Dr. Thompson is implementing an innovative project at St. Mary's Hospital, and I believe it's perfect to complement the work you're developing here." In the minutes that followed, the doctor explained his proposal, a training program for home caregivers, focused on first aid and early identification of chronic disease symptoms. The idea was to create a basic care network in communities with limited access to health services. "When Michael told me your story and what you did for Lily, I realized you would be the ideal person to coordinate this project," concluded Dr. Thompson. "Someone who understands both the medical aspect and the social reality of those who work as caregivers." Sarah looked at Michael and Jennifer, who were watching her expectantly. "I'm confused. Do you want me to leave my job here to take on this project at the hospital?" "Not at all," replied Michael quickly. "The idea is a partnership. You would continue as coordinator here and dedicate part of your time to the hospital project, which would be partially funded by the Anderson Group as part of our social responsibility." "And what about Lily?" asked Sarah, thinking of the girl who still needed constant supervision to control her condition. "We would continue counting on you to guide her care," replied Jennifer, "but we've hired a nurse for day-to-day care, following your recommendations. You would be more of a supervisor than a direct caregiver." Sarah took a deep breath, processing the information. "And my registration with the medical board, how would that work?" "We've already initiated the reactivation process," informed Dr. Thompson. "With my endorsement and that of St. Mary's Hospital, I don't anticipate problems, especially considering that the reports you made years ago were subsequently proven." The news caught Sarah by surprise. "How do you know about that?" "I was a member of the ethics committee that reviewed the case after you left Boston Medical Center," he replied, with an understanding look. "I always considered what happened to you unfair." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. After years of feeling invalidated and forgotten, it was strange and comforting to hear that someone had recognized the injustice she had suffered. "I need to think," she finally said. "It's a generous proposal, but I need to consider how it will affect my daughter, my routine." "Of course," agreed Michael. "Take the time you need, but allow me to add a detail that might help in your decision. The project includes an internship program for final-year medical students. I thought it might be interesting for Emma in the future, considering her interest in the medical field." Sarah raised her eyebrows, surprised. "How do you know Emma is interested in medicine?" It was Jennifer who answered with an affectionate smile. "Lily told us. Apparently, Emma wants to be a heart doctor like her mum. The two have been talking a lot on the phone since they met." The idea that the girls had developed a genuine friendship, independent of the adults, touched Sarah deeply. It was a reminder that, amid all the complications of the adult world, Children had a natural ability to find meaningful connections. "Thank you for the opportunity," said Sarah, standing up. "I promise to give my answer by the end of the week." When she left the room, she felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. It was as if she were waking from a long period of hibernation, each cell of her body gradually remembering what it was like to be truly alive, not just surviving. At the end of the day, Sarah decided to take a different bus than usual, which would drop her off near Boston Medical Center. She hadn't planned this visit, but felt an almost magnetic impulse to return to the place where her life had changed so drastically. She walked slowly around the hospital, observing doctors, nurses, and patients coming and going. From the outside, everything looked the same. The same imposing building, the same automatic doors, the same constant flow of people. But she knew that inside, both the hospital and she herself had irrevocably changed. "Dr. Mitchell?" A female voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned and found Renata, a nurse with whom she had worked for years. Older now, with grey strands in her once completely black hair, but with the same attentive look and warm smile. "Renata, it's been so long," replied Sarah, genuinely happy to see a friendly face from her past. "My God, it really is you!" exclaimed the nurse, hugging her enthusiastically. "You won't believe it, but I was thinking about you just today." A patient came in with a case very similar to that gentleman on the 4th floor, remember? The one who had Takotsubo syndrome that no one could diagnose, and who only got better when we discovered his daughter was stealing his medication, completed Sarah, surprised to remember so clearly a case from years ago. "Exactly. I've always used that case to teach new residents the importance of investigating patients' family contexts." They talked for a few minutes, briefly updating each other on their lives. Renata told her that she now coordinated the cardiology nursing team and was visibly shocked to learn that Sarah had worked as a nanny in recent years. "A shame what they did to you," commented the nurse, indignant. "After you left, a lot came to light. Some of the doctors involved in the scheme were removed. Others quietly retired to avoid scandals." "I heard about that recently," replied Sarah. "But what matters now is moving forward." When they said goodbye, Renata held Sarah's hands firmly. "It's good that you're returning to medicine, Dr. Mitchell. We need professionals like you, who aren't afraid to do what's right." Those simple words, spoken with sincerity, were like a balm for old wounds that Sarah didn't even know were still open. She boarded the bus that would take her home with a feeling of lightness she hadn't experienced in years. In the apartment, she found Emma studying at the small kitchen table. The girl looked up when her mother entered and smiled, a smile that lit up her face in a way Sarah hadn't seen in a long time. "How was your day, Mom?" asked Emma, closing her science book. "Full of surprises," replied Sarah, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "And yours?" "Cool. The biology teacher said my work on the circulatory system was the best in the class." "I'm not surprised," smiled Sarah, sitting across from her daughter. "You've always had an aptitude for science." "I think I take after you," replied Emma with evident pride in her voice. "Lily called me today, did you know? She wanted to know if we can go to the planetarium together next weekend. Her dad said he can take us." Sarah observed her daughter carefully, the rosier cheeks, the brighter eyes, a different energy emanating from her. It wasn't just the adequate medical treatment provided by the health insurance, but something deeper, the joy of making a new friend, of having plans, of looking beyond physical limitations. "Sounds like a great idea," she replied, thinking about how her life and Emma's had intertwined in unexpected ways with the Anderson family. "And I have news for you. Soon, I might go back to working as a doctor, at least partially." Emma's eyes widened. "Really, Mum? You're going to wear a white coat again?" "Maybe, I'm still deciding. It would be a special project training people to better care for those in need. Like you cared for me and Lily." "Yes, something like that," smiled Sarah, touched by her daughter's intuitive understanding. "What do you think?" "I think it's amazing," exclaimed Emma with genuine enthusiasm. "You'll be able to help a ton of people, and who knows, maybe one day I can work with you." "Who knows," replied Sarah, feeling a wave of hope, imagining a future where her daughter would follow in her footsteps, but without carrying the burdens she had carried. "Now tell me more about this biology project that impressed your teacher." While Emma excitedly explained her project, Sarah felt her cell phone vibrate. It was a message from Michael. "Lily won't stop talking about the planetarium. Thank you for allowing Emma to be part of her life. It changed something we didn't even know needed changing. The simplicity and sincerity of the message brought tears to Sarah's eyes. How unpredictable life was. All the winding roads, all the injustices and difficulties had somehow led to this moment. Her daughter happy, her career possibly rising from the ashes, and a family that had entered her life by chance now becoming a significant part of it. That night, lying in her simple bed in the small apartment that they could soon exchange for a larger place, Sarah allowed herself to dream again. Not of grandeur or riches, but of a dignified life, where her knowledge and experience would be valued, where her daughter would have opportunities, where the invisible barriers that separated people like her from people like the Andersons could be, if not torn down, at least made more permeable. The week passed at an accelerated pace. Sarah immersed herself in developing the occupational health program at Michael's company, creating assessment protocols and identifying employees with specific medical needs. In her visits to different Anderson Group units, from corporate offices to factories in the metropolitan area, she clearly observed the disparities in healthcare access between different hierarchical levels. The factory workers in Quincy have almost 3 times more cases of untreated hypertension than administrative employees, she explained to Michael during an update meeting, and most of them only discover the problem when there's already significant damage. What do you suggest? He asked, analyzing the graphs she had prepared. A mobile health unit that can do regular screenings at the factories, associated with partnerships with nearby clinics for continued treatment, replied Sarah, pointing to a map of Boston and the metropolitan area where she had marked strategic points. The cost would be diluted over time by reduced absenteeism and increased productivity. Michael smiled, impressed with the pragmatic approach. Always arguing based on numbers, you quickly learned the corporate language. I learned that ideals need strategy to become reality, she replied with an ironic smile. Not everyone is convinced merely by what is ethically right. Touché, laughed Michael. Mobile unit project approved. And what about Dr. Thompson's proposal? Have you decided if you'll accept? Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of enthusiasm and apprehension. I'll accept. I believe I can contribute significantly, especially considering my experience from both sides. Great, replied Michael, standing up. I'm sure you'll do exceptional work, as you've been doing here. Before Sarah could leave, Michael called her again. Oh, and Sarah, Jennifer asked me to remind you that Sunday dinner is still on. Lily is counting the days to show Emma the new telescope she got. We'll be there, she promised, still getting used to this new dynamic where the boundaries between professional and personal relationships were becoming increasingly fluid. On Friday of that week, Sarah visited St. Mary's Hospital to better understand the structure and discuss the project details with Dr. Thompson. As they walked through the corridors of the modern, well-equipped hospital, so different from the chaotic Boston Medical Center, where she had worked for years, Sarah noticed curious looks from the medical staff. Don't mind the looks, commented Dr. Thompson, noticing her discomfort. Most are just curious about the doctor who reported the scheme at BMC and now returns to medicine in such an innovative way. So that's my reputation now? Asked Sarah, half amused, half apprehensive. For some, yes. For others, you're the specialist who Michael Anderson, one of the city's most influential businessmen, personally chose to lead his corporate health program. Stories change, depending on who tells them. The observation was insightful and reminded Sarah of how public perception could be fluid. The same action, reporting fraud that had destroyed her career years ago, was now seen in a different light, thanks to the validation of authority figures like Michael and Dr. Thompson himself. What matters is the work we'll do from now on, she stated resolutely. Past stories matter less than the lives we can impact now. Dr. Thompson smiled with evident approval. That's exactly why I want you on this project, Dr. Mitchell. That ability to look beyond circumstances and focus on what really matters. On Sunday, Sarah and Emma prepared with special attention for dinner at the Andersons. It wasn't the first time they had gone there as guests, rather than as employee and employee's daughter. But there was still a certain nervousness, an acute awareness of the social differences that, despite everything, persisted. Do I look okay? Asked Emma, twirling to show the simple but pretty dress Sarah had bought especially for the occasion. Beautiful, replied Sarah, fixing a strand of her daughter's hair. Lily will love it. The taxi Michael had sent arrived punctually, and during the journey Sarah observed the city through the window, reflecting on the paths that had brought her here. From the Pine Hill community to the mansion in Beacon Hill, from the white coat to the nanny uniform, and now, back to a renewed version of her professional identity. A full circle, but with a different Sarah, stronger and wiser than that young, idealistic doctor who once believed that truth would always prevail. Upon arriving at the mansion, they were greeted not by Jennifer or Michael, but by Lily, who ran to hug Emma with contagious enthusiasm. "Come see my telescope," exclaimed the girl, pulling her older friend by the hand. "You can see the moon's craters." The girls disappeared toward the garden, leaving Sarah alone in the entrance hall. For a moment she stood there, absorbing the contrast between this visit and all the other times she had entered that house as an employee. Same furniture, same walls, same stairs, but a completely different context. "They get along so well, don't they?" commented Jennifer, appearing at the living room door. "It's as if they'd been friends their whole lives." "Children have that capacity for immediate connection that we adults lose over time," replied Sarah, following her hostess inside. The room was decorated for a more informal dinner than Sarah expected. Michael was on the veranda, observing the girls in the garden with a look that mixed pride and a certain melancholy. "Thank you for coming," he said, noticing Sarah's arrival. "It means a lot to Lily, and to us too." There was a sincerity in his voice that Sarah had learned to recognize in recent weeks. It was the tone of someone who was relearning priorities, rediscovering what really mattered after years pursuing goals that, in the end, didn't bring real meaning. "The pleasure is ours," she replied, observing the girls below, one head of straight hair and another of voluminous curls, leaning over the telescope, sharing discoveries and dreams under Boston's starry sky. At that moment, Sarah knew with certainty that she had made the right decision, not just in accepting the project at the hospital or the new position at the company, but mainly in allowing her life and Emma's to intertwine with the Anderson family in a way that transcended social barriers and conventions. Because in the end, they were all just people trying to find their place in the world. A businessman rediscovering the value of fatherhood, a socialite learning to see beyond appearances, a girl fighting a medical condition, a teenager overcoming physical limitations, and a doctor who had become a nanny and now found a new path, one that honored both her knowledge and her life experience. "I think we're all starting over, aren't we?" commented Jennifer, joining them on the veranda. "In different ways, but equally significant." "Yes," agreed Sarah with a serene smile. "And maybe that's exactly what we all needed." Below, in the garden, Lily pointed to something in the sky, and Emma carefully adjusted the telescope. Their laughter reached the adults, a pure and hopeful sound that promised brighter futures for all of them. 6 months passed like a breath of wind among the hills of Massachusetts. Fall tinged Boston with golden and reddish tones, creating a transitional scenery that reflected the changes in the lives of everyone involved in that unexpected story. The Anderson Group's mobile health unit completed its first semester of operation, with results that exceeded the most optimistic expectations. Parked that morning in the Quincy factory yard, the adapted van received an orderly line of employees for routine exams and preventive consultations. Sarah, wearing a white coat over discreet but elegant clothes, attentively attended to a middle-aged worker who reported knee pain after years of standing on the production line. "Mrs. Celia, we'll refer you to an orthopedist, but I'll also suggest some adaptations to your workstation," explained Sarah, making notes on her tablet. "Small changes in the height of the bench and proper foot support can significantly reduce pressure on the joints." The woman smiled, grateful. "You're different from the other company doctors who've been through here, Dr. Mitchell. They barely looked at us. They just wanted to know if we were fit for work or not." "Perhaps because I've been on the other side," replied Sarah, with an understanding smile. "I know what it's like not to be seen." After concluding the morning appointments, Sarah reviewed the data collected with the nursing team accompanying her. The program had already identified dozens of cases of undiagnosed hypertension and diabetes, as well as orthopedic and respiratory problems related to working conditions. More importantly, it was implementing personalized solutions for each case, from medical treatments to ergonomic adaptations in workstations. "The numbers are impressive, Dr. Mitchell," commented Marcus, the head nurse of the mobile unit. Absenteeism in this unit has dropped almost 30% since we started the interventions. It's what I always tell Mr. Anderson, replied Sarah, organizing her things to leave. Health isn't an expense, it's an investment. Each employee who can adequately treat a chronic condition represents long-term savings, besides the incalculable human gain. Upon leaving the factory, Sarah checked her watch. She had exactly 1 hour before her meeting at St. Mary's Hospital. The home caregiver training project had expanded beyond initial expectations, attracting attention from other institutions and even the city health department. In the parking lot, she found the driver Michael had insisted on assigning to facilitate her complex logistics between various commitments. "To the hospital, Dr. Mitchell?" asked Anthony, opening the car door. "Yes, but can we quickly pass by Pine Hill? I want to check how the apartment renovation is going." Sarah's old apartment was being transformed into a small community health center, a personal project she had initiated with part of her new salary. The idea was to create a space where community residents could receive basic health guidance and referrals to the public network, reducing the distance between the vulnerable population and available services. Sarah and Emma had moved to a comfortable apartment in the Back Bay area, close enough to Beacon Hill, to facilitate frequent visits to the Andersons' house, but without the ostentatious luxury that would make Sarah feel out of place. It was a middle ground that well symbolized her new position in the world, neither the renowned doctor she had once dreamed of being, nor the invisible nanny she had become out of necessity, but something new and authentic, built from all her experiences. Upon arriving at Pine Hill, Sarah was greeted with hugs and smiles by former neighbors. Mrs. Wilson, who now coordinated the recruitment of local caregivers for the training program, proudly showed the new facilities of the community center. "We already have 15 people enrolled for the next course, Sarah," informed the lady, displaying the list of names. "Most already work caring for elderly or children in the community, but without any formal training." "Exactly the profile we're looking for," replied Sarah, satisfied. "People with a natural vocation for care, who just need technical knowledge to enhance what they already do by instinct." After a quick inspection of the works, which were almost completed, Sarah headed to St. Mary's Hospital. There she found Dr. Thompson in a meeting room, accompanied by representatives from the health department and a private university interested in incorporating the caregiver program into the nursing curriculum. "Dr. Mitchell, we were commenting on the impressive satisfaction rates of program participants," said one of the department representatives, consulting a folder of documents. 95% classify the training as transformative for their professional practice. "The credit goes to the team and mainly to the caregivers themselves," replied Sarah, with humility. "They bring a practical wisdom that no manual can teach. We just add technical knowledge to that base." The meeting extended for almost 2 hours, with discussions about expanding the program to other regions of the city and the possibility of transforming it into a replicable model at the state level. When it finally ended, Sarah checked her cell phone and found a message from Jennifer. "Don't forget Lily's piano recital tonight, 7 p.m. Emma is already here. We picked her up from school. Formal attire, but I know you already knew that." Sarah smiled, reading the message. It was still surprising how her daughter had integrated into the Anderson family routine, spending afternoons at the mansion after school, participating in music lessons with Lily, sharing language tutors, and most importantly, developing a genuine friendship that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. Upon leaving the hospital, Sarah decided to make a quick stop at a store in the mall to buy a suitable dress for the recital. While trying on some options, her cell phone rang again. It was Michael. "Sarah, sorry to bother you." His voice sounded tense, different from the usual confident tone. "Lily is having an anxiety attack before the recital. She's afraid of making mistakes with the music. Says she can't breathe properly. Jennifer tried to calm her down, but it's getting worse. Emma suggested we call you." "I'm on my way," replied Sarah immediately. "Ask Emma to stay with her and try to keep her in a calm environment without too many stimuli." 40 minutes later, Sarah entered the Anderson mansion, being quickly led to Lily's room by a visibly concerned Jennifer. "I've never seen her like this," whispered the mother as they climbed the stairs. "She's always been so confident with the piano." In the pastel-toned room, they found Lily sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing rapidly while Emma held her hand, speaking in a low and calm voice. Michael was standing by the window, his tense countenance betraying his concern. "Hello, little one," said Sarah softly, approaching and kneeling in front of Lily. "I heard the piano is being stubborn today." The girl raised her eyes, her face marked by tears. "I can't play right, Sarah. My hands keep shaking and I forget the notes. You know, our bodies sometimes do funny things when we're nervous," explained Sarah, holding the small hands in hers. "It's like we have an alarm inside us that sometimes goes off unnecessarily, like a crazy alarm clock that rings at the wrong time." The analogy drew a small smile from Lily. "I'll teach you a trick I use when I get nervous before an important surgery," continued Sarah, aware that everyone in the room was watching her. "We close our eyes, breathe deeply through our nose, counting to 4, hold the air counting to 4, and release very slowly through our mouth counting to 8. Want to try with me?" Lily nodded, closing her eyes and following Sarah's instructions. Emma spontaneously joined them, and soon Michael and Jennifer were also participating in the breathing exercise, creating a moment of silent connection that seemed to suspend time within that room. After a few minutes, Lily's breathing had normalized, and her hands were no longer shaking so much. "Better?" asked Sarah. "A little," replied the girl. "But what if I make a mistake in front of everyone? And what if you do?" returned Sarah gently. "What happens if you miss a note or two?" Lily seemed confused by the question. "People will notice. They'll think I'm not good enough." "You know who sometimes misses notes? The greatest pianists in the world," intervened Emma, surprising everyone with her wisdom. "I read it in a music magazine. They say the important thing isn't to play everything perfectly. It's to make people feel something when they hear you play." Michael approached, sitting beside his daughter. "Your friend is right, Princess. No one expects perfection, not even your teachers. We'll be there to applaud your effort and courage, not to count mistakes." "And what if I still get nervous when the time comes?" asked Lily, still insecure. "Then look at us in the audience," suggested Jennifer, joining the group on the bed. "We'll all be there, cheering for you. You can look at Emma or at Sarah or at us. Choose whoever makes you feel most secure." Those simple words, "choose whoever makes you feel most secure," reverberated in the room in a way that transcended the moment. In a way, it was what all of them had done in recent months, chosen each other as points of security in their lives. 2 hours later, seated in the front row of the music school auditorium, Sarah, Emma, Michael, and Jennifer watched Lily climb onto the stage, wearing a sky-blue dress and a matching hair ribbon. The girl adjusted the piano stool, positioned her hands over the keys, and for a moment seemed to hesitate. Her eyes scanned the audience until finding the small group in the front row. Sarah smiled encouragingly, and Lily returned the smile before beginning her presentation. The first notes of Fur-Elise filled the auditorium, executed with an emotion that compensated for any small technical imprecision that only very trained ears could perceive. Observing the girl play, Sarah felt a wave of pride that went beyond the professional satisfaction of seeing a recovered patient. It was something deeper, more personal. The pride of someone who had accompanied a growth, who had been part of a journey. Beside her, Emma watched fascinated, her fingers moving discreetly in her lap, as if mentally accompanying the melody. Michael and Jennifer held each other's hands, a gesture of intimacy that had become more frequent in recent months, as they rediscovered not only their daughter, but also each other through the changes that Sarah had inadvertently provoked in their lives. When the presentation ended, the audience applauded enthusiastically. Lily made a small bow, her face illuminated by the joy of the overcome challenge. Before leaving the stage, her eyes met Sarah's again, and in that look there was a clear message that transcended words: gratitude, affection, and a newly discovered confidence. After the recital, during the small reception offered by the school, Sarah observed from a distance the group that had formed around Lily. Colleagues, teachers, Michael and Jennifer receiving congratulations, Emma taking photos with the new cell phone she had received for her birthday. "It's amazing how life comes full circle, isn't it?" commented a voice beside her. Sarah turned and found Dr. Richard Myers, her former colleague from Boston Medical Center, now Lily's pediatrician. "Richard, I didn't know you were coming to the recital," she replied, surprised by the unexpected encounter. "I come to all important events of my patients when possible," he explained. It's part of the integrated approach you always advocated, remember, knowing the child beyond the symptoms. I remember, smiled Sarah, recognizing her own words from years ago. Good to see that some lessons persisted. Many of them, agreed Richard with a thoughtful look. You know, after you left the hospital, things gradually changed. Your absence was felt more than you imagine. The system remains the same, Richard, replied Sarah, without bitterness, just stating a fact. People like us come and go, but the structures remain. Not always, he contested. Sometimes one person can initiate a change that continues long after their departure, like ripples expanding when a stone falls into water. The metaphor was beautiful, but Sarah knew reality was more complex. Still, something in Richard's tranquility, in the way he spoke of changes, aroused her curiosity. Has the hospital changed that much? She asked. Not completely, of course, but enough for someone like you to consider returning if you want. The new director restructured the cardiology department, implemented stricter protocols for medical ethics, created secure channels for internal reports. The information caught Sarah by surprise. She hadn't seriously considered the possibility of returning to Boston Medical Center. The memories were too intense, both good and painful. I'm happy with my current projects, she replied, diplomatically. The program at St. Mary's is growing, and the work at the Anderson Group has been extremely rewarding. Of course, Richard quickly agreed. I'm not trying to recruit you. I just thought you'd like to know that your legacy remained, in a way. Before they could continue the conversation, they were interrupted by Lily, who ran up to them with Emma right behind. Sarah, Dr. Richard, did you see? I played everything right. We did, little one, smiled Sarah, bending down to hug the girl. It was beautiful. Wonderful, agreed Richard, greeting his patient with a high five. Especially the ending. Very feeling. That's what Emma taught me, explained Lily, looking with admiration at her older friend. She said that notes are important, but feeling is more. Emma blushed at the compliment. I just repeated what my mom always says about medicine. Her daughter's words touched Sarah deeply. She had never imagined that her reflections on medical practice would be transmitted this way, through Emma, to a completely different area like music. Michael and Jennifer joined the group, bringing champagne flutes for the adults and juices for the girls. A toast to our pianist, proposed Michael, raising his glass, and to everyone who made this night possible. As they toasted, Sarah noticed how the circle they had formed, she, her daughter, the Andersons, even Richard, represented an unlikely constellation of lives that fate had intertwined. People from different worlds with distinct stories gathered in that moment of genuine celebration. Later, when the reception ended and everyone prepared to leave, Michael approached Sarah while the girls and Jennifer chatted with some teachers. I have a surprise for you, he said, handing her an envelope. Intrigued, Sarah opened it and found official documents with the Anderson Group letterhead. Reading the content, her eyes widened in surprise. Anderson Institute for Community Health? She asked, confused. Michael smiled with that mixture of pride and humility he had developed in recent months. The board approved it yesterday, an independent foundation but linked to the group, to expand and institutionalize the work you began. It will have its own budget, administrative autonomy, and if you accept, you'll be the executive director. Michael, I don't know what to say, stammered Sarah, genuinely at a loss for words. Say you accept, he replied simply. It's the next logical step. The work you initiated is too big to remain restricted to a company department or a hospital project. It deserves its own structure, adequate resources, a dedicated team. The proposal was more than Sarah had ever dreamed, even in the times when she still believed her medical career would follow a traditional and ascending path. It was the opportunity to create something truly transformative, combining her clinical experience with the social sensitivity she had developed over years of hardship. I need to think, she replied, honestly. It's a huge responsibility. Of course, agreed Michael. Take the time you need. The complete documents are there, including the initial budget proposal and preliminary guidelines I drafted, based on what we've discussed in recent months. The care and seriousness with which Michael had prepared the proposal demonstrated more than simple gratitude for Lily's life. They revealed a genuine respect for Sarah's work and vision. On the way back home, with Emma asleep on the back seat of the car, Sarah leafed through the documents in the dim light of the cabin, gradually absorbing the magnitude of the opportunity presented. The institute could unify and expand all the initiatives she had been developing separately: the occupational health program, the caregiver training, the community center in Pine Hill. More than that, it could create a permanent bridge between worlds that rarely communicated as equals: the corporate environment, the healthcare system, and vulnerable communities. A bridge built not only with financial resources, but with knowledge, mutual respect, and a vision of health that transcended the simple absence of disease. Upon arriving at the apartment, Sarah carried Emma, who was still sleeping, to her bed. She observed her daughter's serene face, now healthier and rosier than a year ago, when they lived in the precariousness of the hill and depended exclusively on public health care for the necessary medical care. She sat in the armchair by the window, contemplating the city that stretched out there with its lights, its hills, its inequalities and its possibilities. The same Boston that had witnessed her rise as a doctor, her fall after the reports, her years as an invisible nanny, and now this new chapter that was opening. On the small table beside her, a photo in a simple frame caught her attention: Emma and Lily at the planetarium, wide smiles as they pointed to a replica of the Milky Way on the ceiling. Two girls from different worlds, united by unlikely circumstances, creating together a new universe of possibilities. That's what the Institute could represent on a larger scale, thought Sarah. A space where different realities could coexist and mutually enrich each other, where the technical knowledge of medicine would ally with the practical wisdom of communities, where executives and workers, doctors and informal caregivers could build together a more humane and efficient healthcare system. She took her cell phone and typed a message to Michael. "I accept. Let's build this bridge together." The response came almost immediately. "I knew you would accept. Lily said you never refuse the chance to help more people. She knows you well." Sarah smiled. It was true. The girl knew her well, perhaps better than many adults who had crossed her path. It had been Lily, after all, who first saw beyond the silent facade of the nanny, who asked questions that no one else had cared to ask, who noticed the precision of her care and the depth of her knowledge. And it had been through Lily, through her crisis, her vulnerability on that rainy night, that all their worlds had collided and transformed, like a small grain of sand that, upon entering an oyster, triggers the formation of a pearl. The next morning, Sarah woke before the alarm with renewed energy and a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She prepared breakfast while Emma was still sleeping, taking advantage of the morning silence to mentally organize the first steps she would take as the future director of the Institute. When her daughter finally appeared in the kitchen, hair disheveled and eyes still sleepy, Sarah smiled. "Good morning, sleepyhead. We have news to talk about." "Good morning," replied Emma, sitting at the table. "What news?" As she shared the plans for the Institute, Sarah observed her daughter's reactions, the initial surprise, followed by growing enthusiasm as she understood the implications of the project. "Does this mean you're going to be like the boss of everything?" asked Emma, impressed. "Something like that," laughed Sarah. "It means I'll be able to help more people like us, who need adequate medical care but face barriers. And it also means I'll be able to teach other professionals to see patients as complete people, not just as symptoms." "Like you always wanted," observed Emma, with that acute perception that sometimes surprised Sarah. "Yes, as I always wanted," agreed Sarah, realizing the truth in those words. "I just didn't imagine the path would be so complicated," suggested Emma. "Unexpected," corrected Sarah with a smile. "But maybe it needed to be that way. Maybe I needed to experience both sides to truly understand." That same afternoon, upon entering the Anderson Group headquarters for a preliminary meeting about the Institute, Sarah was welcomed not as the ex-nanny who had saved Lily's life, nor as the doctor who had developed the occupational health program, but as a leader whose vision was about to transform into a concrete institution. Michael awaited her in the main meeting room, along with a small group of executives and consultants. Beside him, to Sarah's surprise, was Dr. Thompson from St. Mary's Hospital, and even more surprisingly, Dr. Richard from Boston Medical Center. "Welcome, Dr. Mitchell," greeted Michael formally but with a warm smile. "Or should I say Director Mitchell? We've gathered some people I believe are fundamental for the initial phase of the Institute." The meeting that followed was intense and productive. Plans were outlined, institutional partnerships discussed, timelines established. The Institute was taking shape, not just as an extension of existing initiatives, but as something new and ambitious, a model that could eventually be replicated in other cities and regions. At the end, when most participants had already left, Michael, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Richard remained with Sarah for a more informal conversation. "You know what's most extraordinary about this whole story?" commented Dr. Thompson, leaning back in his chair. "How something potentially tragic, a child's health crisis, transformed into the catalyst for a project that will benefit thousands of people. It's what we call serendipity in science," added Richard. "Valuable discoveries that happen by chance, when you're looking for something completely different." "It wasn't exactly by chance," corrected Michael, looking directly at Sarah. "It was because someone decided to do what was right, even when it was difficult. Twice, actually. First by reporting the frauds at the hospital, then by acting quickly to save Lily." Sarah felt the weight of those words, not as a burden, but as a recognition of a fundamental truth that had always guided her actions, even in the darkest moments. "Maybe that's what we're really building with the Institute," she reflected. "Not just a health program, but a space where doing what's right is the rule, not the exception. Where professionals can follow their vocation without fear of retaliation. Where patients are seen in their totality, where social and economic barriers don't determine who receives adequate care." "Ambitious," smiled Dr. Thompson. "But if anyone can achieve this, it's you, Sarah." When the meeting finally ended, Sarah decided to walk a bit before getting the car to pick up Emma from school. She walked a few blocks in downtown Boston, observing the movement of the city. Hurried executives, street vendors, students, retirees, all sharing the same urban space, but living drastically different realities. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Lily. "Sarah, Uncle Mark said you're going to have an institute all your own. Can I volunteer when I grow up? I want to help like you helped me." The simplicity and enthusiasm of the message brought tears to Sarah's eyes. This was it, she realized. The true impact of her actions wasn't just in the program she created or the institutions she helped build, but in the seeds she planted in young hearts, like Lily's and Emma's. Seeds that would grow long after she was no longer present, creating shadows under which others could rest and flourish. It was a form of immortality, more meaningful than any professional recognition or social status. She typed an affectionate response to Lily, promising that there would always be a place for her at the Institute, and continued her walk, feeling connected not only with her past and present, but also with a future she was helping shape through her daily choices. At the corner of a busy avenue, Sarah stopped upon spotting a middle-aged woman wearing a nanny uniform, holding the hand of a small child while waiting for the light to change. There was a silent dignity in the woman's posture, a careful attention in the way she protected the child from the heavy traffic. For a moment, Sarah saw herself in that anonymous woman, the invisible nanny who walked daily between Pine Hill and Beacon Hill, carrying not just a backpack with personal belongings, but also knowledge, skills, and temporarily dormant dreams. How many other Sarahs existed in that city? How much wasted talent? How many interrupted vocations? How many potential contributions lost because the system didn't create spaces for people of all backgrounds to flourish? The Institute would be just one step, a small step toward a more just and humane world. But it was a significant step, and Sarah was determined to take it with all the strength and wisdom she had accumulated in her improvised journey through Boston's different worlds. Because in the end, she had discovered that her true vocation wasn't just being a doctor, or a caregiver, or an executive, but rather a bridge builder, someone capable of connecting distinct realities and creating spaces where people could meet as equals, despite their differences. And perhaps that was exactly what the world needed most. Not more isolated specialists in their towers of knowledge, nor more invisible workers serving silently, but people who could transit between these worlds and weave meaningful connections, transforming individual stories of pain and overcoming into collective movements of change. Sarah smiled to herself, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder as she resumed her walk. The road ahead would be challenging, no doubt, with obstacles she couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time in many years, she felt she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she was born to do. It wasn't the end of the story, she knew. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for all whose lives would be touched by the work she was about to begin. Work that had started, ironically, when she ceased to be Dr. Mitchell to become just Sarah, the nanny whom no one noticed but who saw everything.